Hi, I'm Andrew Zukoski, one of the co-founders at Join. We're working to advance a world of abundant and joyful buildings and infrastructure. My background is actually in software engineering. I grew up in the 3D printing world and then spent some time at a Google X spinout doing computational architecture and engineering tools for the cloud. And sort of been an interesting journey. It's given me a fair amount of exposure to a number of leading firms inside the industry, and I'm excited to come here and share some things about some of the problems we're tackling at Join and an exciting industry trend that we've observed among our customers and close partners. And so for today's agenda, I'm going to talk about the ongoing blurring of project phases, pointing to the rise of pre-construction. We're going to talk about decisions that happen inside of the pre-construction phase and why they're important and what's necessary to do them well. Then we're going to talk about the trend that we're seeing, what we're calling the pricing trend, and then a little bit about how different firms have realized it. Speaking to the blurring of different phases, there's a major trend going on around delivery methods utilized. I'm sure everyone that's attending this session is aware of the ongoing shift to design build and construction manager at risk and CMGC delivery methods. And this is a really exciting opportunity in many respects because it means that we're able to overlap activities where in the past we had to finish the entire design before we procured anything to do with the project, before shovels hit dirt and we started the course of construction activities. Now with a design build or a CM at risk job, we're able to overlap pre-construction and often execution activities with the latter phases of design. And this is really exciting for a number of reasons. It means you're able to provide cost feedback earlier on in a project. You're able to provide constructability feedback earlier on in a project as a design is moving forward. And you're able to overlap activities. You can be building the foundation while folks are figuring out the tiling for the penthouse on the 15th floor. And this is exciting for the industry because this new pre-construction phase, this emerging collaborative pre-construction phase, is actually going to determine 80% of project value. And we can think of project value in a number of different ways. We could think of it in terms of the actual value to the owner, the eventual customer of whatever the asset is. You could also think of it in terms of things like risk. And one of our customers explains it to us in terms of they have a budget for write-downs. At the end of the job, there's going to be different things that they have to write down for the owner and they have to eat out of their fee. And what they find is that a lot of these write-downs originate in pre-construction, and that by better managing pre-construction, they're able to avoid the write-downs in the first place and really move firm profitability forward. Looked at another way, thinking in terms of actual opportunities to deliver value to the client, everything that you're going to deliver to the client is going to be decided on in pre-construction. And these decisions, the decisions that are going to impact the project that happen in pre-construction, come in all shapes and sizes and all flavors. I mean, there are some that are large additions of scope, such as adding green room enhancements in part of a new building. Some of which are going to be simple manufacturer choices, choosing between alternative products or alternative systems or alternative materials. Some are going to be substantial changes to the massing or program of the building, and others may be cost optimizations or value engineering decisions, looking to maximize the owner's return for their project budget. And they can be really complicated. Any one of these could depend on backing material that's sourced from many places and that needs to be assembled and presented to owners to give them the right context to make the right decision to move the project forward. Like we consider ostensibly the simplest one here on this slide, the reduce all ceiling heights by 1 foot. Depending on when this happens in a pre-construction phase, this could be a very simple decision or actually one that's very complicated and difficult to get right. If it's done early on in a project in a conceptual phase, this is probably a reasonably straightforward decision. It'll have substantial cost impacts in terms of structural materials and facade materials, and may have an impact on the use of the space and the rentability of the space, depending on the project type. But things can get a lot more complicated if folks try to make this decision late in a project type. And we've bumped into this very decision on a number of projects where late in pre-construction, the project's over budget. Teams start saying, like, how are we going to get costs out of this project? I'm sure everybody's been in this situation. And you look at the building and you say, okay, we'll get costs out by building less building. We'll reduce all the ceiling heights. The structurals will all be shorter. We'll save money in structural materials. We'll save money in facade materials. And people look at that and they say, great, let's do it. But the design's pretty far along, and nobody remembered to check with mechanical, electrical, plumbing engineers, and trade contractors what would be required to implement this decision. What they find when they tried to make this decision late in a project was that moving all of the ceilings, moved everything that electrical conduit's attached to. And it meant they had to eat hefty redesign fees just to accommodate this design change. And not only that, reducing the ceiling height reduced the available space for the mechanical systems. And meant the mechanical systems had to use more expensive components to deliver the same level of service to the building. And the end result of this is you're spending money on redesign fees, you're spending more money on the mechanical systems, you're saving some money on structure. It ends up being a wash, or even being more expensive to deliver a building that for the decades, if not centuries of its lifespan, is going to have a lower ceiling for the entire time. Like, if these decisions are made without the right information, like to manage their complexity, they can be made wrong, and they can take projects the opposite direction of where they were intended to go. And it's really complicated to manage this. These pre-construction decisions are sort of the core, one of the core tenets of what Join, the software company that I work for, brings to the market. And so many teams around the country have developed sophisticated tools to manage this process. Many of these teams have actually adopted Join. What's exciting about that adoption is that it actually gives us an opportunity to aggregate the data and start to derive some insight across the entire industry about what works well in pre-construction and what good decisions look like and what the characteristics of these decisions are. And we've analyzed the data in Join. It's data that comes from tens of billions of construction value across the country, wide range of project sizes. I mean, everything from a couple $1 million for a pool addition to well north of $1 billion for new healthcare structures. And we've aggregated this data, and I wanted to share just two very high-level insights that we've derived from that. The first is that 75% of the cost changes, like if we're looking at budgetary impact, 75% of the total impacts are in about 20% of the decisions. It's a few really big decisions that are going to move the needle for the budget of a project in a big way. That said, a typical decision that gets made is about 0.1% of a project's budget. And that's true across regions, across project sizes, across different types of construction. And what that tells you is that a project, is about 1,000 to 2,000 decisions. That to get a project from, the earliest napkin through to handing over keys, an owner is going to have to make 1,000 to 2,000 decisions that impact the design in some way. And as I'm sure as anyone who's struggled to get an owner to actually make a decision will agree, that's a lot. If we said that we were going to make each of these decisions sequentially and we said, oh, we'll make one a week, like it's pretty good. A lot of these decisions are complicated. It's taking a week to get together the information and present it and make a decision. A week is pretty good for one of these decisions. If you did it that way, it would take 20 years just to make the decisions in pre-construction, and that's obviously way too long. Even if you can find a way to make one a day to get a project through pre-construction, you're still looking at potentially a couple of years to get through it. So what that means is obviously we overlap the decisions. We don't make them sequentially. Teams are juggling, many of these decisions at any one time and have to reconcile their impacts and intersections across different scopes and different aspects of the design and different owner priorities. What that tells us is that efficiency in pre-construction decision-making is going to be really key to delivering the best project, to realizing the value of pre-construction and through it, the potential of every construction project. Now, if you don't do things efficiently, things can go wrong a few different ways. I mean, the highest level, you can't build something until you know what you're going to build. But there are smaller examples. Some decisions made earlier are much cheaper than decisions later, and that's not an abstract process. If we make value engineering decisions about a particular scope before it goes out to bid, the team will be able to recover much more of the value of those decisions than if, a firm is already under contract for it, or if they've already started to move forward with shop drawings or fabrication or installation. So that progress is blocked on those decisions. The earlier they can be made, the bigger their impact. And if these decisions aren't made well, if not made with transparency, it can erode team trust. We heard this great anecdote out of Central California about this, where pre-construction manager was on a project. I think it was a healthcare project, and they were in an OAC meeting, and something came up about how they needed to add an outlet to a room, somewhere in the building, one outlet in a room in the building, and said, okay, what's this going to cost? And the construction team looked and said, yeah, it'll be rough numbers, $1,000 to add the outlet. And the owner sat back and crossed their arms and started to look unhappy, but didn't say anything. A week later, though, the owner came back, and they were really, really pissed off. They came back, and they were holding a bag. And they opened up the bag, and they spread the contents on the table. And it was, a bit of electrical conduit and an outlet and a little bit of wiring and maybe a few tools. They'd gone to Home Depot, and they had bought everything they needed to put an outlet in. And they said, how can you tell me it costs $1,000 to add an outlet to a room when I'm able to go to Home Depot and buy everything I need to put it in for $67? How can you tell me it costs $1,000? And this is an area where where transparency is lacking, and this transparency is eroding the owner's trust. The owner is angry because they don't understand why it costs $1,000 to add an outlet to the room. They can't see what's actually involved in an outlet. They don't understand, or they weren't understanding when they were presented with that number, that it's not just any old outlet. It needs to meet the performance criteria for healthcare building, which is probably different from the discount aisle at Home Depot. And they're missing the labor costs, and they're missing the integration costs, and they're missing the inspections that will be necessary. That all of those other things about, they go on around the actual outlet, they weren't able to see. They didn't have transparency into that, and so they thought they were being taken for a ride, and they were being screwed. And it didn't just impact that decision, right? That relationship would have gone south, and it would have made every conversation with that owner harder for the duration of the project. And the last thing that's possible doing these decisions well is just that opportunity is knocking. We've got, every day it seems, new opportunities in off-site construction, new materials, new ways of delivering construction. And the common theme across prefab and off-site and cross-laminated timber and many of these innovations is that they have to be considered early. An example, you can't take a building that's designed on a 12-foot structural grid and figure out how to cut it up into a 10-foot grid that will fit on the back of semi-trailers and then can be built off-site. You have to design around those methods of construction much earlier if they're going to actually bring any value to the project. And there's huge opportunity in these methods. They have to come through pre-construction, and it means that pre-construction professionals and pre-construction teams are the tip of the proverbial spear in taking construction into the next century. Okay, so what do we need? We buy it. We buy that pre-construction is important. We buy that decisions made during pre-construction are really impactful for project value, and we buy that we need to do it efficiently because the decisions are complicated and they have a lot of impact on team dynamics and the result. What do we need for efficient decisions? Okay, we've worked with a wide number of contractors. We work with large contractors, we work with mid-sized contractors, we work with small contractors. And what we found very consistently is that teams need clear reporting. Everybody needs to see the information that's in flight during pre-construction. They need to be able to see it in a language that they understand. It's not enough that they're able to see once a week or even once a day, like an up-to-date spreadsheet. If the up-to-date spreadsheet has 10,000 lines in it, it's impossible for them to understand what each of them means. Things need to be presented in a language that the recipient understands. If I'm a designer, I don't understand master format really. I guess my spec writer does, but if I'm thinking about layouts, how is it going to help me to tell me how many linear feet of electrical conduit there are in the job? And if I'm an owner, I'm also probably going to think programmatically. It impacts, my cost model for how the asset will eventually perform. And I may have one or potentially two different budgets that need to tee out to get the project moving forward. I need to see things in a simple way that I understand. And then information needs to be up to date, which means that it needs to be fundamentally collaborative. This information about the current state of a project, about the decisions that are in flight and what they're going to do for the project depends on a very wide number of stakeholders, and it's changing all the time if we're going to get through those 1,000 to 2,000 decisions that are necessary. Means that the information that backs those clear reports, must be collaborative, and it must source this information from a wide number of people. And those people, those stakeholders, need to embody a number of different specialist perspectives. Construction projects are complicated, and the way that we as an industry navigate that complexity is by assembling specialists who are able to understand the risk associated with a particular area, and then abet that risk. One thing in particular that's necessary from these perspectives is a picture of cost. Different projects have different priorities. Owners want, different things. It's sometimes a little bit idiosyncratic, and, we smile and we'll tell stories about that. But almost every project, maybe every project, needs to balance these other priorities against cost. So cost is really important in pushing pre-construction decisions forward. Okay, how do we get costs? We buy that pre-construction decisions are important. We think we understand what's necessary to deliver them efficiently. How are we going to get these costs together? Does this mean estimation? No, it doesn't mean estimation anymore. That's how we used to derive costs. It used to be with a design bid build methodology, not with a design build or a CM at risk methodology, that estimates came in from beautifully drawn 100% construction documents. That design dictated the cost. If that didn't work, folks did value engineering in response. But that's not how teams work anymore. Now, costs need to be provided throughout design and throughout pre-construction on an ongoing basis. This is a huge opportunity, and it means that costs can inform design instead of the other way around. We're not going to need to be in a situation where we're constantly delivering to owners the bad news that they can't afford champagne on their beer budget. And with that, we're able to enable totally new ways of working. We're able to enable target value design or target value delivery workflows that iteratively align design and cost on an ongoing basis throughout pre-construction. We see this, we hear this from industry. We thought this quote summed it well. It came from a VP at substantial GC, nationwide GC, which is that they don't do full estimates anymore. The old process of going from a stack of drawings to takeoffs, assigning unit costs, summing it up, presenting it, that's not done anymore. Folks have to rely on the trades. The old way of doing estimates, they were estimates. They weren't necessarily particularly precise. Precision comes from the trades, from the people who actually understand how to get the work in place, who understand what's involved in the constructability of it. So this customer, at least, is moving to emphasize trades over traditional estimating. This is giving insight into this trend that we see. This is what we call pricing. It's not estimates. We're not going to guide pre-construction decisions based on estimates in the future. We're going to guide it based on prices. And prices come from a number of different places. It's not that estimates go away entirely, right? They're an important part of pricing structure. As phases blur, the different sources of information we use to assemble a complete picture of costs also blur. Instead of moving from conceptual to a detailed GC estimate, to a trade estimate, to procure, to actually having work in place sort of all at once, every scope at the same time, scopes are all over the place. Early scopes may be in place while later scopes, are still being procured. And owners are demanding design control longer and longer into projects' life cycles. What this means is new scopes constantly get added on top, and it means that any one time, a complete picture of the price of a project is going to assemble information from many places. There'll be some conceptual numbers in there. There'll be some numbers derived potentially from a traditional estimating process. But then a lot of the numbers are going to come from other stakeholders. Now, the way that we get this pricing information out from the varied set of stakeholders that are going to come together on a project. There's a slow way to do it, and we'll walk through the slow way of doing it. And, in this, the owner might say, hey, we're thinking about adding balconies, or maybe just changing the anchoring system on the balconies for this building we're bringing out of the ground. And they'll work with the architect, they'll work with the GC, they'll come up with an understanding, the scope, maybe some design guidance. GC will look at this, pick it apart, understand the impacted trades and impacted scopes there. They'll send it out. Maybe it's an invitation to bid. Maybe it's just an email. Maybe it's a text message. Goes to trade contractors. They'll look at this, do their own takeoffs. They'll send, takeoffs and product lists out to their supply chain. They'll get back material prices. They'll add in their labor costs, their own overhead and profits and fees. That'll get passed to the GC. They'll reconcile it, potentially do some leveling across, multiple potential partners. They'll add their own soft costs on top of that. They'll wrap that up, and then they'll pass that back to the owners. And it means that it takes weeks to get an understanding of what would it cost to do X or what would it cost to do Y. And that's even if each of these stakeholders in isolation has adopted the latest and greatest in design or estimating or bid management tools. And it's because we have to do pricing, we have to necessarily assemble information from this chain of stakeholders. And if it's done with email in between, it takes weeks to get the information in and out of emails. The result of this is just it's awful. We talk to teams that are living this life, and nobody in that chain is happy with it. It's largely adopting the tools and the methods of a design bid build methodology to collaborative pre-construction, and it's really painful. I mean, we talk to trade contractors, mid-sized electrical contractor in New York City. They talk about how every week they get 100 invitations to bid, but they can't read all of them. They can't price all of them. They can't respond to all of them. They respond to 10. They respond to the 10 from folks they've already worked with. They're going to win one of those jobs. And they're constantly wondering, like, what did we miss? Which of these jobs are real? Like, why do we only win 1 in 10? At the same time, GCs are really struggling to get us to respond to their jobs. Like, why is it this way? We feel like we're drowning in these invitations to bid. I mean, they told us these like amazing bid management tools, these tools that digitize like one of the most important functions in traditional project delivery. They said like straight up that it was the worst thing that had ever happened to the industry because it's led to them just drowning in invitations to bid. For the general contractors who are playing air traffic controller for that information, it's a real see the family problem. We spent some time with a gentleman by the name of Steve Watkins up in Seattle. He's got a really big beard. It's very distinctive. He's a prominent pre-construction thought leader, amazing estimator and pre-construction manager. And he describes like being at the Mariners game on a Sunday afternoon, getting this like itch in the back of his head that was saying like, hey, this information you're pulling together in that Excel spreadsheet that you're going to email to the owner on Monday morning, like, did you double check each of those formulas? Are you sure that you got the latest information copied out of the emails that came in and pasted into the right place in there? And he ends up leaving. And this happens all the time, and we hear it across the country. The pre-construction managers and the estimators who are managing the information flow inside of pre-construction are working 80 hours a week, and 40 or 50 of those hours are just in assembling information. They're literally getting RSI, copying and pasting information in and out of email. And the architects and engineers who are on the receiving end of this aren't happy with it. Yes, they want to design wide words. They also want to win future work, and they don't want to go out of business doing it, even as fees continue to be eroded. We hear from Gensler and other firms that increasingly they're being asked by their clients to design to budget, and they're responsible, for any overages that happen. And this means that they need up-to-date cost information to support it. They're almost flying blind, trying to move the design forward without feedback from the other stakeholders in the job. And the owners are caught in the middle. Their numbers change every day. They don't really necessarily understand why. They've got their own stakeholders that they're accountable to and that they need to be able to articulate where the project is and why to. And they feel sometimes like no one's helping them. Nobody's on their side. Now here, it might be tempting, I'm a technologist, it might be tempting to have some sort of a version where we say that, well, we'll bring everyone to the table early and we'll invest just a ton of money in BIM modeling very early, and everybody will have Revit licenses and everything will be in the model and it'll all be fine. And we're not here to say that actually. Like, there are substantial and well-documented benefits from leveraging specialist expertise during pre-construction, but it's really hard to find a sort of proverbial table big enough. Not everything can be shared between every stakeholder, and the sort of shared risk models, IPD models are just not appropriate for every project. There's no way that they're going to work for everyone. And, on other projects, there's just too many stakeholders physically to bring together. I mean, it'd be like some sort of awful Thanksgiving dinner where like two of your relatives start arguing about like scuba diving and everybody else is just sitting there twiddling their thumbs, waiting for pie to come. We can't do it physically. We can't necessarily go full open book. Have to do it digitally, but there's so much noise, especially if we're using, the bid management tools and communication tools of a design bid build methodology. Okay, but this is where the trend that we're seeing comes together. And the trend that we're seeing is that folks are finding ways to work together early. And doing that, they're able to deliver up-to-date pricing to the project teams. And so the trend we see, in usage of the Join platform is increasingly teams are able to bring together dozens, sometimes hundreds of stakeholders representing the owner, owner's reps, different other owner constituencies, architects, engineers, acoustic consultants, lighting consultants, mechanical, electrical, plumbing engineers, like you name it all, as well as the construction team, general contractors. There might be pre-construction staff, estimators, trade managers, trade contractors themselves, sometimes even material suppliers, are coming together into a digital space where they're able to share the right information. And they're able to do it organized around this shared project concept. Instead of each stakeholder having their own digital systems that are in their back office that they go to and they interact with, and they take results from that or reports from that and pass it to other stakeholders, and everybody, slowly dies inside of Outlook. Folks are coming together into a single system that allows information to flow with much less friction between different stakeholders. And it's good. It eliminates many of the email hops that were the fundamental slow bottleneck of delivering pricing information. But it also allows them to share information while holding true to contractual structure. Join and allows for compartmentalization, where you can share information knowing that people only see what they really need to see. This is because the platform is built for these collaborative models. It's built for design build, it's built for CMGC, it's built for CMAR, it works for IBD as well. This is really how teams are able to deliver real-time pricing. It's not turning the wheel of traditional estimating faster and faster, just sort of yelling at the estimating team to just do another set of takeoffs and update the estimate or update the bid. It's connecting the stakeholders against this shared project concept. It allows for information to flow much more easily between them, and allows for firms who have no idea of what's going on, right? Like the GC, their life assembling this information is much easier. But it also means that trade contractors can understand, like, what the heck is going on in projects. They don't have to call to ask, like, hey, did you make a decision about whether or not we're going with the 4x4 or the 2x2 carpet tiles yet, right? They're able to see this on an up-to-date basis. We just give a little picture of what this looks like. Teams are able to understand, minute by minute almost, where projects are, what things will impact the project, what decisions will impact, the price of the project and the outcome for the owner, and then what's necessary to get those decisions over the line. Teams report substantial ROI to this. You don't need to take our word for it. We'd be happy to share more about any one of these really, but I'll call out DPR here. They're a firm that really believes in lean construction methods, has adopted target value design methodologies very broadly inside of the firm, and they're just over the moon because they've been able to migrate all of those processes that relied on complicated Power BI and spreadsheet workflows into Join. And now teams are able to understand in between every milestone down to the minute where the cost of the project is and what avenues the project has to move forward. And that's exciting because it's available not just to contractors like that, but it's able to contractors who might not have the resources that DPR originally had to develop Power BI workflows. So we're able to take the best of these pricing methodologies and these collaboration methodologies and then offer them packaged inside of the software platform to teams around the country working on projects at any scale. That's what I came to share. My name is Andrew Zukoski. I'm the CEO at Join. Please do reach out if you'd like to learn more, and you can also find some information on our website. Thank you for the time.